I'm here.
Oh, he's here. I'm sorry. Great. Then let's get started. Mr. Freed, would you call roll?
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Present.
Commissioner Graham,
Here.
Commissioner Javendel,
Present.
and Chair McCroskey.
Here.
And Vice Chair Fong notified us that he will not be attending tonight.
We don't get to jazz him about his newlywed status next time. With that, we move on to item number 2, public comment. This is a chance for persons desiring to address our commission on items that are not otherwise on the agenda. And we limit each speaker to 3 minutes. As with other items for public comment, members of the public, please use the raise hand feature. And one of our staff members will call on you as they see your hand is up. So do we have any raised hands for general public comment?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay. Great. Then we'll move right along to item 3, our presentations. And this month we have the monthly police data on collisions and citations.
Thank you, Chair McCroskey. This report is reporting on September police data. In September, there were 3 vehicle pedestrian collisions, 0 bicycle collisions, 19 vehicle collisions, 5 of which were listed as injury collisions. 16 moving citations were issued during the month and 3 DUI arrests were made. And also included in the agenda packet were some reports from Berkeley Safe Track, which provides some state and national collision data. And with that, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. And I'd like to say that I asked for the Safe Track data to be included. There are lots of details there. I think what I took away from their recent announcement of data analysis was that the rate of passenger and driver injury in vehicles continues to decrease pretty precipitously. And that's where much of the regulatory effort has gone, into airbags and car design. But the injury and death rate for pedestrians and those using active transportation outside of enclosed vehicles continues to go up. In fact, as much as 20% in the last 5 years. The Safe Track study notes that by far the single largest thing that can be done to prevent or to stop this slide into further injury and death is to reduce speeds. And I thought that was pretty informative to our work. Any questions about the police data or the Safe Track? Seeing none, let's see if we have any public comment. Again, you would use the raise your hand button to indicate that you'd like to talk.
I'm not seeing any hands right now, Chair McCroskey.
No, I'm not either. Thanks. So with that, I'll bring it back to the commission. Any further comment or discussion by commissioners on this item? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Freed, and let's move along to our next item. And pardon me as I navigate my screens. We're going to move on to our consent calendar, which this time consists of one item, the Transportation Commission meeting minutes of September 23rd. So this would be the chance for any commissioner to pull this item in case you need to make corrections or suggest corrections. Seeing no interest, is there any member of the public that wishes to pull this item for discussion? And you would use the raise your hand button. Seeing none, can I get a motion to pass the consent calendar from the commissioners?
I'll move to pass the consent calendar.
Can I get a second?
Sure, I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Graham. Any further discussion? Mr. Freed, would you take the roll?
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Graham,
Yes.
Commissioner Javindel,
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. We passed our consent calendar. This will move us on to item 5, and we'll start with item 5.1, the pavement management program conceptual plans for several areas in our city.
Thank you, Chair McCroskey. I'm going to bring up Andrew Lee, and I will kick this off and then hand it over to him. One second here.
Welcome back, Mr. Lee.
So this first item is going to be looking at 3 different roadway segments, and I'll first briefly run through the background information on both the pavement program and the streets being discussed tonight, and then I'll hand it over to Andrew Lee with Parisi Transportation Consulting to discuss the project concepts. Commissioners should feel free to ask questions during the presentation, but we'll follow the presentation with time for commission questions, public comment, and commission discussion and potential action. The projects being discussed tonight are part of Albany's annual street rehabilitation program. The primary objective for these projects is to improve and maintain pavement conditions in the city. These projects also include necessary improvements to roadways to achieve compliance with American with Disabilities Act, and which generally entails upgrades to curb ramps that are non-compliant. The current pavement project roadways were identified in the pavement management plan developed in 2019 and are the result of an analysis of current conditions on roadway and roadway treatment options and planned utility work by both the city and outside agencies. And the current set of projects have been separated into 3 phases. The first 2 phases are currently in design. At the June commission meeting, staff outlined Cleveland, Brighton, Key Route, and Ordway for planning work to be presented to the Transportation Commission in advance of those roadways proceeding into design. These were identified by staff for evaluation of potential active transportation and safety improvements to be considered for inclusion in the pavement project. So first up is Cleveland Avenue, and the active transportation plan includes a vision for a north-south shared use path along the eastern side of I-80 between Buchanan Street and Cerrito Creek. Segment 1 of this path is complete, running along the 500 block of Pierce, and segment 2 includes a connection from the end of that segment along Pierce Street and through Caltrans property and city-owned property, part of the Peggy Thompson Pierce Street Park. And then development for an affordable housing project at the northeast corner of Washington and Cleveland include a path alignment that would bring the path down to Cleveland Avenue, approximately 250 feet north of Washington Avenue. While the vision in the active transportation plan for this facility is for an off-street path, there's very limited right-of-way on the west side of the street before railroad property, and there are a lot of utilities along that stretch as well. So for this repaving project, staff asked the consultants to develop conceptual plans for an on-street bicycle facility in conjunction with the paving project. Other main transportation network considerations are that this is a truck route. Southbound Cleveland Avenue is the route from the westbound I-80 off-ramp to Buchanan Street. So there is higher vehicle volumes in the southbound direction as well. The other ramps from the freeway all have direct access to Buchanan Street. And I'll also note a bus stop outside of the USDA facility. The 80 line is currently suspended, but we will need to check with AC Transit if there's a sense whether the 80 may potentially still run on this segment of Cleveland in the future. For Brighton Avenue, the active transportation plan calls for a class 3 bicycle route along Brighton. Brighton also runs between the Albany Middle School and the new annex at St. Gabriel Avenue. The commission has previously discussed the Brighton-St. Gabriel intersection at earlier meetings in conjunction with the school construction project. The commission has also looked in the past at the possibility of a cycle track connection between the Ohlone Greenway and Albany Middle School, most recently in conjunction with the North Albany Traffic Calming Project. So staff asked consultants for the city to develop possible on-street concepts for the St. Gabriel Brighton intersection, as well as for the potential cycle track connection. The final one for this discussion item is the Ohlone Greenway and Marin intersection. The commission's previously discussed this connection, and most of the intersection design is already completed. This is one element that we wanted to bring back for further discussion. Previously, we had discussed the connection from the westbound Marin Avenue bicycle lane to the southbound Ohlone Greenway. And the last design presented to the commission indicated or had a pullout to wait for the light to change on the street and then to complete the turn. And there was commission comments indicating an interest in pursuing a design that would bring the cyclist up to the sidewalk level in advance of the intersection, as opposed to that. So we've asked Andrew to prepare a concept of what that would look like. And the primary purpose for that is to facilitate that two-stage left turn movement. And with that, that completes the background for these projects, and I will hand it over to Andrew to walk through the concepts he's developed.
Great. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you, Justin, for teeing that up for me. We're going to go in the same order as the items presented by Justin, and let me just share my screen. I want to briefly show a street view for each of the segments. I'm not going to run through most of this information. I think the street view perspective of the cross section is going to be informative. For Cleveland here, from Washington to Buchanan, it's a approximate 37-foot curb to curb width, and this is looking south. And so the railroad right-of-way is to your right or west, and there are many utility poles, trees, and a pre-existing curb that constrain any work in that area. And so our consideration was to see what would fit within the existing curb to curb width. I'm going to switch over to the plan. Excuse me. Let's see. All right. So this is Cleveland Avenue. And let me just refresh. This is the existing condition, the cross section. This is looking north, so apologies for the change in orientation. There are residences on the right side of this cross section. Now, parking, on-street parking with travel lane in each direction. As mentioned in Justin's presentation, there is a large amount of vehicle traffic in the southbound direction. We performed 3-day counts on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday earlier this month and found that it was approximately 5,000 vehicles with around 3% truck traffic in that southbound direction, whereas in the northbound direction, it was approximately 700 vehicles per day. And so that's a rather large imbalance. And given that, the concepts we designed took into consideration the amount of vehicle traffic and the potential separation that could be afforded to somebody in a bike lane. And so with this is a option that shows a southbound bike lane. Given the widths that exist right now, a northbound bicycle facility would need to be a shared lane rather than a dedicated lane. There is another option that we devised that would further increase the width of this southbound bike lane, which could be striped as a 6-foot bicycle lane with a 2-foot buffer. We just have it shown as a total of 8 feet. And in the northbound direction, similarly, it would be a shared lane facility. We were constrained by lane widths per Caltrans and also AASHTO standards, American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, which recommends that for facilities that carry low numbers of truck traffic and large vehicles, including buses, that going down to 11 feet is generally accepted, but minimums could go down to 10 feet. But given the amount of trucks coming off of I-80 in the southbound direction, we didn't want to go directly to a 10-foot vehicle lane. And certainly 10-foot vehicle lane next to a bicycle facility that was only a on-street bikeway with a stripe was not something that we saw as a all ages type facility. So lastly, this cross section here is a 2-way separated bikeway. Caltrans has standards for what are sometimes referred to as cycle tracks. And this would place a 2-way facility on the west side of Cleveland. It has certain advantages with very few driveway interruptions, no curb cuts to speak of, except for one infrequently used driveway. Otherwise, it's a long continuous stretch. And this provides this 2-way facility that would ultimately connect to another 2-way facility that would pass through the park and connect over to Pierce Street. So it's a 2-way facility connecting to a 2-way facility. So there's some symmetry in that connection. We have 2 sets of proposed vehicle lane widths. Option 1 shown here is a 10-foot vehicle lane. Now the effective width could feel a little bit wider because there is a 2-foot buffer between the bikeway and the vehicle lane. And so the positioning of a raised barrier closer or farther away from the edge stripe would allow for some wiggle room per se. However, given the difference in in vehicle volumes between southbound and northbound, we devised a second option, which would provide a 11-foot lane in the southbound direction to accommodate the larger number of trucks and just larger number of vehicles going in the southbound direction. And in that, the northbound direction is much lower traffic. AASHTO does allow for 9-foot travel lanes for low traffic facilities. In terms of what this looks like from a plan view, starting from the north end, there would be a crossing not shown on this exhibit to the future path that would connect to Pierce Street and the park. And we show here a 8-foot bikeway facility with the 2 10-foot lanes. And This is a continuous bikeway facility, so it is not interrupted by intersections with Washington or Solano or any of the residential driveways that would occur if there were a bicycle facility on this east side instead. As we go past Johnson Street and turn the bend, there is a driveway that I mentioned. And then on the next sheet, this is a change in orientation. So now north is pointing up on the page. We transition to from the two-way bikeway into a shared lane facility that connects to Buchanan Street. This is primarily residential access, and then ultimately a connection to the Buchanan Street crossing and to the path. And then Pierce Street is over here on the screen. So that's the first concept for Cleveland. Transitioning over to Brighton, there were two, let me just give an overview, excuse me. So our project extents were from Masonic Avenue and the Ohlone Greenway. This is the west end. And then as we progress down the page on our east side terminal, this is Key Route Boulevard. The two areas that we focused on for this conceptual design were this connection at the Ohlone Greenway where it crosses Brighton. There is a access gate to Albany Middle School, and our understanding is that people traveling to and from the school, whether they be students or community members using the facilities for recreational means, is that they tend to ride on the sidewalk in order to access this gate, or there may actually be some cut-through traffic here as well. Now, the existing condition in this curbside area is a red curb, so there's parking is currently prohibited in this area. Also, the BART facility spans this area, and so it is a bit underutilized in its current state. So we saw that as an opportunity to provide another two-way separated bikeway facility, 8 feet for the bicycle lanes with a 3-foot buffer. And this would require shifting the center line for the vehicle lanes on Brighton to the south. Otherwise, the parking and loading here at Albany Middle School would not be changed. We also took a look at San Gabriel Avenue. There have been recent improvements to the curb ramps here, which provide access from the middle school to the annex. And in its current state, it has higher visibility crosswalks marked with edge striping to denote areas where vehicles should stay out of. These are sometimes called painted bulb outs, and there are raised features that are affectionately referred to as armadillos because they're small circular type features that look like curb stops. So our assignment to see what could be done to further improve the safety and separation and comfort for people walking across Brighton, either to Albany Middle School or to the annex. And so a secondary option that we came up with was largely retaining the existing painted bulb outs, but changing the raised feature from the armadillos with about 3 foot, 3.5 foot tall bollards, which we refer to as K71 bollards. They're different from traffic delineators because they're quite a bit thicker, about 5 inches or 6 inches in diameter. And they're pretty frequently deployed these days, and they don't get knocked down quite as easily as the more typical 2-inch traffic delineators that you see out there. This design retains the existing curb ramps, and so we would not be modifying that at all. It would largely be a striping improvement here on the corners to improve sight lines for people in the crosswalk. A third option, or second option, excuse me, that we came up with was to further improve the vertical separation and protection here at the corner, which would take the form of a raised island. These islands would be constructed outside the existing lip of gutter, and so the existing stormwater drainage would be retained, but these curb islands would have more of a permanent feature while providing similar benefits of allowing clear sight lines for people waiting to cross at the curb ramps and preventing vehicle incursion into the corners. All right. The third situation.
Mr. Lee,
Yes.
on that third option, is that mostly a low-lying improvement? Would it involve any vertical element?
So the raised islands typically take the form of a 6-inch curb, and that would be the perimeter. They can be higher, but I don't see them much higher than 6 inches in most cases. And then within the island, sometimes they are paved concrete surfaces. They're not meant to be walked on, and so other options include cobblestone if you want to retain a low maintenance kind of installation. Plants, especially low water need plants, succulent gardens and that sort of thing are sometimes deployed as well. It is a little bit of a maintenance concern. Yeah, but succulents do also grow very low profile because we don't want any plants that would go higher than 2.5 feet, which I think is the standard for when it starts to obstruct driver visibility of small children. So there are options within these raised island type features.
Thanks.
All right. For our third location, this is Marin Avenue, and Masonic Avenue is to my left here. North is pointing straight up. This option, or this concept is responding to the Commission's desire for a design that could allow people on bike traveling on Marin going westbound to make the left turn onto the Ohlone Greenway at the sidewalk level. Right now, under the existing configuration, sometimes people will enter the curb ramp and try to make this tight maneuver, which is rather difficult given the lack of space. And so the idea here is to provide a channel in advance of this curb ramp, which is part of an improvement also underway by the city. So the features to call out here, which I can show in detail, are a approximate 10-foot long ramp area, which results in an effective 5-foot width here. We're showing a 30-degree angle, which is something that would be suitable for somebody traveling downhill on Marin. And we would advertise this pullout with a sign in advance of the existing tree here. And so this sign serves as notice, as with the stencil, to slow down and enter the cutout. And then a supplemental feature, we would paint this curb white to further show that this is a raised curb area and put an object marker in this area. We've also noted that this is not a walking area as it matches back to the existing sidewalk. And so the idea here is that it would be some sort of cobble feature. And then just to further flesh this out, this is a concept of what the sign would look like. We do acknowledge that there are some people that are likely to use this cut through area to access northbound Ohlone Greenway. But the design here is such that it's not so wide that somebody could take this at high speed. And even if somebody did miss this, they would be able to slow down, hopefully, and then access the Ohlone Greenway through the curb ramp. So that concludes my presentation for these 3 items. I'll turn it back over to the commission.
Thank you. Let's start with commissioner questions. Commissioner Graham.
I have just a couple questions. Going back to the Brighton, where you were doing the cycle track, is that dimension where you have, 8 feet for the cycle track? Is that, I can't read the plans exactly. Does that include the gutter area, or is that to the gutter line or to the curb line?
That's to the face of curb. So it does include that 2-foot gutter area.
And then what is the connection for the 2A cycle track at Pierce Street? You're saying that's the proposed class 1 bike lane that goes down through Pierce Street all the way, or through the park from Pierce Street? Is that what we're talking about? But it's not built yet, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Those are my questions for now.
Other commissioner questions? Commissioner Del Rosario.
Sure. For the Cleveland proposal, if it was a one-way lane, where would the northbound bikes travel? Would those be on Pierce?
If it was a one-way southbound bike lane or separated bikeway, northbound bicyclists could share the lane with northbound vehicle traffic, or they could take Pierce Street, but that's also a shared vehicle lane.
Got it. Okay. And then for the Brighton proposal, is the difference between the concrete solution for the intersection of St. Gabriel and the flat work, is it just a cost difference? Are there any other disadvantages for the concrete solution versus the painted solution? Emergency vehicle access or something like that? I don't know if there's anything like that.
It largely remains within the footprint of the existing armadillo type feature. The raised islands, I think, provide more of a permanent installation where future projects like paving would go around those islands rather than demolishing them. Whereas with the current paving project, the impetus is that you'd have to remove the armadillos in order to do your repaving and then replace them.
Got it. Okay.
I'll just add one comment. So in discussion with fire department for those all options, the higher bollards, they were less inclined. They liked the armadillos on the lower ones in terms of when they need to pull in and use that space. And then our feedback on the concrete one was they might want it to be rolled if they were turning and needing to turn and use that space, and whether we would have lower compliance potentially than we currently have was our concern with that.
Got it. Thanks. That's all.
Other commission questions? Commissioner Javendal?
No questions. All makes sense to me. Just going to add a quick comment that because I live within 1,000 feet of Cleveland, I'm exiting the video whenever that one comes up, and I won't vote on that piece. I'll just abstain on that, but vote on the other 2.
Okay, we'll make sure to keep them separate. Great. I was curious about the route of the previous 80 bus route, and it appears that it only went southbound on Cleveland. So that was interesting to me. I guess I have the same question about the curb pan on Cleveland within the bike route, and whether when you have lightweight traffic like after transportation, whether you can shorten the curb pan width.
So we're talking about the existing gutter on the southbound direction of Cleveland.
Mhm.
Those would need a full reconstruction of the curb and gutter in order to be less wide.
I see.
They tend to have reinforcing steel, and so sawing through that concrete does not lead to something that has a long life afterwards.
Can I follow up on your question, Chair McCroskey, just
Yeah.
quickly?
Please.
But in that same instance, I think it's the vehicle lanes are 12.2 and 12.2. So is there the potential to take any of the space from those vehicular lanes and make that cycle track area wider?
Was this
Oh,
referring?
I was
is this
talking.
referring to
I was
Cleveland or
talking to
Brighton?
Brighton. Sorry, my
Brighton.
bad.
No problem.
Sorry.
So
We can come back to that one.
I'm happy to answer that question. The inquiry is whether the 8-foot two-way bikeway on Brighton could be increased in width to, say, 10 feet in order to provide more width outside of that concrete gutter pan. I'll say yes. However, we did a Albany fire truck turn model, and for one, we saw that the northbound movement from Masonic onto eastbound Brighton, under existing conditions, they already tend to turn about half a lane's width into the opposing traffic. And with that southward shift, that condition is exacerbated. And also there is a matter of the lane offset outside of that intersection with Masonic, because the lanes going westbound will need to transition laterally back over to Brighton to the west of Masonic. And so I'm not saying that either of those issues are fatal flaws for that idea to shift them, but they are considerations that led us to where we are now. I'll also say that it's a relatively short section. So in either condition, it may not be a big deal. I hesitate to hypothesize as to how closely people ride to the curb. I feel like a lot of times your wheel is actually rather narrow, but the footprint of a body spans a bit wider, and so I feel like people are able to stay within the areas outside of the gutter most of the time pretty effectively.
Yeah, I do think that the concern is, though, it's a spot. I mean, it's a short cycle track where we're building it so people can make like turns and movements, right? Which is when people don't stay in the track. But I'll save my comments. Back to you, Chair McCrust.
Right. I guess I would just piggyback back again at you and ask if that curb along the sidewalk is projected to be reconstructed as part of this project, or does that remain from the current built curb on Brighton?
I don't think we've gotten to that level of detail. I think only if it's deteriorated sufficiently would we be looking to reconstruct it, but we haven't done that analysis.
Fair enough. Right. Those were my questions. Are there any other questions from the commission? Seeing none, let's open it up to public comment. And again, use the raise hand feature. And I see we already have at least one. Mr. Bond, are you letting people in this evening?
I'm trying to and having trouble.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Michelle's running the clock for the time.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Block.
For some reason, can't seem to be able to allow him to speak. Not sure if Justin or Jeff, are you able to allow Jeremiah to speak? There we go.
Hi, thank you. Appreciate it. So bicycle lanes are obviously very important. You know, it's obviously a green way to travel, and you know, it encourages a healthier community by getting out there and exercise on a bike. Now these lanes, I mean, everything looks good, of course. I was just wondering if we're promoting all these bicycle lanes, if we're promoting, you know, bicycle safety. I know I'm getting kind of off topic, but I mean, I was just on Solano Avenue today at the laundry program, and we literally have parents teaching their kids to ride their bikes across the street, and it doesn't make sense. So I hope Albany has bike safety programs with the schools and the parents, because I see a lot of parents teaching their kids to ride bicycles across Solano during the crosswalk. When I was a kid, I was raised to walk your bike across the street. So I don't know where everybody forgot that rule. And also down Solano, all these kids are riding these electric scooters and razors, you know, 15 miles an hour on the sidewalk. And today I had to ask a kid to slow down on the sidewalk because you got all these people at Hal's Cafe. Sorry, I'm getting off topic, but all these bike lanes are fine and dandy as long as the city is offering bike safety classes. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other raised hands from the public. And seeing none, let's bring it back to commissioners for discussion and comments. Who would like to get us started? Commissioner Del Rosario.
Sure. Marin and Masonic looks fine. I had a concern too about bikes coming in at a quick speed into the ramp, and then being able to make the right turn to go northbound onto Ohlone Greenway. It sounds like the consultant team looked at that, so I don't know if it's going to be an issue, and I trust the consultant's perspective. We'll see if other commissioners have anything else on that item. For Brighton, I support well, I think the way that the consultant team talked about it, I guess there are pros and cons for the concrete solution, and if they'll be effective, especially if there's going to be a roll curb, and that makes it less effective. Some sort of you know, the treatments there now, I think are well, when the car is over that, you're gonna feel that much more than you would on, say, a roll curb and flat concrete. So there needs to be some other texture treatment there if it is the concrete issue, or sticking with the armadillos. What we have now seems to work for all parties on that one. The turn from northbound Greenway into the cycle track, I wonder if that's tricky and what's happening there. It seems like making that right turn while on your bike would be difficult, and then maybe that corner has to be softened a little bit, and I don't know if that's possible with the limit line of the vehicles right there. But the way that it was drawn in the designs, it looks like it's a pretty sharp turn to make, and you may have to go into the opposite direction of the cycle track. I think that's it for Brighton. And then finally for Cleveland, so I know there are questions about the 80 bus. And so the reason why the 80 bus uses Cleveland is that it comes from Pierce and it needs to make a left turn onto Buchanan. So it can't do that. So it goes around on Cleveland and goes under the overpass and gets onto Buchanan that way. Staff is correct that the bus is currently suspended. I don't think that's a permanent suspension. I think H-Trans is looking for dollars and ways to bring that back under some pressure that the agency is feeling. So if that were the case, I think we should make some assumptions that there would be a bus still making that movement there. And therefore the lane going southbound would need to be 11 feet. And then the turning movement for the bus from, I think it's Solano to Cleveland. So westbound Solano to southbound Cleveland would need to be looked at to make sure that the turning template could work and the bus would be able to turn with the cycle track there. And if anything, the striping on the intersection maybe would have to be pulled back so that buses can cut the corner, so to speak, in order to make that turn instead of trying to hook it tighter and possibly conflicting with the cycle track on the right side of the vehicle. But otherwise, I support Marin Masonic. I support the two-way cycle track on Cleveland, given the comments are addressed both on transit and the ones from the other commissioners. And then Brighton, I think it's the armadillos as the solution, what's currently there. But I could be convinced otherwise, and then just making that turn from Ohlone to Masonic is my concern. That's it.
Thank you. Let's see. Commissioner Graham?
Yeah, thank you. So I agree, Cleveland. I think having the separated cycle track is great. And so if we can do the 8 foot with the 2 foot buffer and then like 11 and 9, that seems optimal, assuming that the bus comments can be addressed. And same for Marin, that seems fine with me. My only concern, or my biggest concern, is like I pointed out, the cycle track issue at Brighton. And I mean, I get the turning radius of the fire truck, but we're not talking about anything but striping here. So a fire truck, can move. People see fire trucks and they get out of the way. So I don't think that's a reason not to try to make that. And I think given that we're talking about lots of turn movements, I think as big as we can make that cycle track would be great. And then I suggest one of the other things we could do would be just to move back that stop bar on the westbound, just to give even a little bit more flexibility, right? For the bikes to sort of cut those corners because they're essentially doing a little S turn. And then I agree with Director Del Rosario. I mean, I think the armadillos make the best sense there. I'm not a big favor of making new curbs. I don't think the investment for the curb really has, like, it's not the best cost benefit analysis use of money for the return on investment. The one thing I did have a question about, which I just noticed, which is at the Brighton Spokane, excuse me, the red paint and the curbs. Can you tell me why it's not the same amount of paint at each intersection? Or at each, corner of the intersection?
Justin, do you mind?
Yeah,
Am I missing a joke here? Just like,
no, it started as the same amount in both directions, but our intersection red curb policy is a longer red curb on the approach side, as that's the closer pedestrian visibility constraint with an approaching driver than the departure side.
okay.
So our intersection red curb policy is 20 feet on the approach and 10 feet on the departure.
Okay. So each one is 2010 though, because they're not all marked. So it's not like, okay, great. Those are my only comments.
Before we get further along, I wanted to relay one other feedback that I think I failed to include in the memo was we did talk through with fire department these designs, and they, similar to AC Transit, prefer 11 feet. I think with the Cleveland route, we, especially with it being adjacent to a buffer, that we might get comfort with doing the 10-foot, but I think the 9-foot will be a difficult ask. But if the bus route is just south from Solano, one thing that popped into my head is north from Solano, where would be the main fire access, where the fire truck would be approaching, could be 10-10, and south of there, where there's very little northbound volume, maybe could go to 11-9. So I wanted to at least float that if that's where we landed, if the commission would be comfortable with a couple blocks of it being 10-10 and then widening back to 11, because we may end up there given the various considerations.
Okay. Looks like Commissioner Graham is done. Commissioner Javadel.
Thank you. I agree with what I'm hearing as far as the armadillos on Brighton being fine to stay as they are. If in future we run into maintenance issues with them, we could consider concrete, but for now, I think they're working just fine. No need to spend more to change that out. At Marin Masonic, I think that the turn lane ramp that's being created is no more restrictive than the existing curb cut in order to turn right and head north on the Greenway. So I'm generally fine with that. So I certainly support both of those.
That was short and sweet. Great. So I'm liking the plans overall. I need to mention about Brighton, that I heard that the school district is not currently leaving the driveway fence nearby open in the mornings. But that same fence is still open after school and on weekends for recreational use. So regardless of the school district's current morning access, I think it makes sense to provide this connection. And, you know, the school district has from time to time changed their policy on whether that gate is open in the morning for access for bicyclists. I personally prefer that because it means that cyclists, students are, and hopefully teachers are not biking along the front of the school on the sidewalk, which they may currently be doing. I haven't really surveyed that. The current best route is actually to take Portland and Spokane from the Greenway, but current best route and middle schoolers, well, you know. So I think that's good. We talked about the gutter, and you know, other than just a preference for a narrower gutter pan, especially when cyclists are coming up to a stop sign at the crossing and are going to want to put their foot on the curb. But if it doesn't make sense to change, it doesn't make sense to change. But keep it in mind if that curb does get rebuilt. And then looking at the three options for the San Gabriel Brighton intersection, I'm pretty happy with the armadillos, but I will note that the other two have been drawn in a squared off manner. And I've always kind of wondered about the curved nature of the enclosures for the armadillos. And it's almost like you look at one and then you kind of figure out where it goes, and then the next one is organic. I would prefer to see a squared off striping, similar to the other two designs when the armadillos are put back in. I think that's just more straightforward and specific, and really gives the idea that pedestrians are in their space when they come out to the edge of that area, rather than the line that goes back to the curb and says, no, wait. So I would add that caveat. And then at Marin and the Greenway, I think this looks like a great option. I'm hoping that you know, the diagram shows a tree, which I believe is existing, and it's far enough away from that area that the tree is not blocking visibility. The one group that I'm worried about is anyone walking eastbound. And I would love to see an arrow coming out of that ramp onto the sidewalk, just to sort of give some heads up, you know, hey, there might be a bicyclist coming here, you know, maybe you should put your phone down and look at the roadway and protect yourself. I don't think there's any other notice for people on the sidewalk other than the facility itself, which is probably uncommon and may not serve enough of a warning. Right. Other commissioners, comments on other commissioner comments, including mine?
I agree with your proposal to square off the striping. That makes sense to me.
Great. Shavendal as well. Great. The arrow, does that sound good?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yes.
Ooh.
Getting some nods. Great. Okay. Are there any additional commissioner comments? Shall we go for a motion?
There's a staff proposal for 10 and 10 going north of Solano on Cleveland.
Thank you. And for thinking about narrowing the two-way bikeway at was it Washington? The Washington intersection or I'm sorry, I'm having trouble switching between windows on my small screen. There was concern about a turn radius. Can somebody remind me where that was?
Oh, that was that my comment from Ohlone northbound to Brighton westbound into a little cycle track. I don't know if that turns it. Look, I looked again at the drawing. There seems to be a little buffer there between the cars and the. I don't know if that's gonna simplify things. I don't know if maybe the consultant might want to jump in if there's any issue there that he sees.
I think there was an issue on Cleveland.
Right, to Chair McCroskey's comment, I was in reference to Commissioner Del Rosario's comment about the bus taking a westbound left turn onto southbound Cleveland Avenue.
Yes.
So we will take a look at the bus turning model for that left turn and make sure that the bus is able to make that turn without hitting anything.
Right.
I guess if that's an issue, I would prefer that if there's no telephone pole in the way, maybe the roadway could bulb out a little bit to the west rather than changing the width of the two-way cycle track, if there's space.
The standards for the two-way cycle track are down to their minimum, actually, that you can't go with width less than 8 for two-way traffic. However, the lanes on Cleveland are squarely in the middle. And so we'll take a look and see about maybe adjusting the center line on Solano, perhaps, or just dialing back some of where the posts are in case there is some incursion and the bus could go over the painted buffer occasionally, just basically giving a wider gap in the raised features there to make that turn a little bit more comfortable.
That sounds great. I'm glad you're not thinking of narrowing the cycle track. Would somebody like to, I don't know if we've directly addressed the width of the travel lanes. I support a narrower northbound travel lane. And I think that's what I was hearing in general from the other commissioners. Would somebody like to attempt a motion?
Is this a motion or just recommendation? I'm sorry.
Good question.
Yeah,
Somebody,
motion on the two that I'm participating in, which is make the improvements on Brighton, including the squaring off of the paint around the armadillos and optimizing the width of the two-way cycle track and the improvements proposed on Marin at Masonic, including the turn arrow.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Second from Del Rosario. Mr. Freed, do you want to take the polling?
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Graham,
yes.
Commissioner Javendel,
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. And now we'll excuse Commissioner Javendel and look at the Cleveland alignment. Can I get a motion on this one?
So I could make a motion to support the recommendation for a two-way cycle track on the west side of Cleveland with an 11-foot southbound lane, 9-foot northbound lane, and then look into the feasibility of a 10-foot and 10-foot balancing out north of Solano, and all contingent upon a turning radius analysis of the buses coming from westbound Solano to southbound Cleveland.
Second,
Commissioner Graham seconds. Any further discussion? Mr. Freed, would you poll us?
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Graham,
yes.
Chair McCroskey,
Yes.
Commissioner Javendel abstains.
Great.
I'm abstaining. Yep.
All right. Thank you for that. Let's move along to item number 5.2, our pavement management program concepts for Key Route Boulevard.
Thank you. We will do a similar handoff to the last item. There we go. Can you guys see the screen? Oh, there it goes. Okay. So this item is part of the same pavement management program described in the last presentation. I'll go through the same order. Unlike the last item, this item is being brought to the commission for preliminary feedback based on direction from the commission. Further analysis may be prepared for commission review and a public notice mailed to potentially affected residents and property owners. The Albany Active Transportation Plan includes a Class 3 bike route on Key Route Boulevard as part of the proposed fast bikeways network. The ATP also includes a boulevard median walking path concept. And signage and striping plans were prepared for much of the on-street bicycle network and the ATP. For Key Route Boulevard, these plans include a bicycle lane in the southbound direction and a shared vehicle bicycle lane in the northbound direction. This is due to differences in the roadway width in the northbound and southbound directions. This configuration has not yet been installed. Also, more recently at the December 2020 meeting, the commission discussed and recommended median stops be installed along Key Route Boulevard, similar to what is now in place at the intersection with Brighton. Additional signage and striping improvements at the intersections were also recommended at that meeting and will be incorporated into the project design. The consultants were asked to prepare conceptual alternatives for cycling facilities along Key Route Boulevard. And as we walk through them, you'll see that some of these are within the paving and within what we would expect within our roadway paving project. Others may be a standalone future active transportation project, but may inform what we want to do with the paving design. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andrew to walk us through.
Thank you, Justin, and good evening again. Let me just share my screen. So we are looking at Key Route Boulevard for its full extent. I'm showing here an aerial view of one of the more challenging sections, which is adjacent to Albany High School. North is pointing to your left on the screen. And so we have some measurements that we took. There is a difference in width between the northbound lanes, which is what we're looking at here. We measured approximately 30 feet, and these are the approximate dimensions that we assigned to the parking. Near the high school, parking is quite well used during the day, and the loading activity in this area is quite active during school drop-off and pickup periods. In the southbound direction, it is approximately 2 feet wider. And so you'll see in further concepts that this additional width affords additional opportunities not found in the northbound direction. So our first concept here is what we're calling buffered bike lanes. And the big trade-off as shown in this section in the northbound direction is that the curbside parking and effectively loading would be replaced with a bikeway. And given the demands on the curb access, this concept presents one that has more of a separated bikeway or cycle track type nature. So we show a 8-foot bikeway, which is on the upper end for a one-way facility. As you saw in the previous presentation, it could actually accommodate a two-way facility, although that's not what we're showing here with a two-way facility on a one-way section of the street. But here, this one is just merely showing a curbside separated bikeway. One concept not illustrated, but that could be described is that the parking on the curbside could be retained and the parking on the median side could be the part that's removed with the arrangement of the bikeway and the parking swapped in this northbound direction. And we show this in the northbound direction with the assumption that there could be more demand related to accessing the high school and the need for greater separation due to all the loading activity here. In the southbound direction, because we are dealing with 2 extra feet, the on-street bike lane could be striped without any removal of the on-street parking. And so that leads to another concept not illustrated, which is that if there was any reconstruction of the median to widen the northbound lanes, that a buffered bikeway situation would be able to be accommodated. I will note, however, that given loading and unloading activity adjacent to the high school, we've seen in other locations that vehicles using this bike lane, in that it's not buffered by any raised separation, that double parking and loading in the bike lane does tend to occur. Actually alluded here. So this is essentially the same as the prior concept in terms of facility width, but we show a two-way bikeway running curbside on the northbound side of Key Route Boulevard. This does present some challenges related to how a person on bike navigates through an intersection. It does result in some potentially unexpected movements for people driving or walking to have two-way facility on one side of the street. But that is an opportunity that could be realized if the parking on the curbside was removed. The two-way bikeway is actually even less, is more conflict prone adjacent to the median, because it does result in, I think, more unexpected movements at intersections. Although the benefit on a median side two-way bikeway is that there is less potential conflict with residential driveways, as we examine Key Route to the north and to the south of Albany High School, where there are a lot more residential driveways, and a two-way bikeway facility in the residential parts of Key Route Boulevard would result in a lot of unexpected conflict for people driving in and out of their residential driveway. The southbound direction isn't showing a on-street bike lane, but the prior concept with a southbound bike lane could still be retained. And then in consideration of a bikeway that does not require either removing parking or moving the median curb, there is ample width within the median for a potential paved facility. We came up with two such concepts. One would be a pair of one-way paths that we're showing as 8 feet. And the idea here is that with the presence of large trees in the median, that perhaps the path would be more of a meandering alignment that could try to stay away from tree roots and other tree impacts. Whereas a two-way multi-use path being wider could possibly have more tree impact than a pair of one-way facilities, albeit that the amount of paving with a multi-use path that's two-way would be less than what would result from a pair of one-way paths. I'll also note that we're aware that people walking may also want to use such paths, and so a pair of narrow paths could result in less utility for people walking and biking being able to share such facilities, because it's not as though people necessarily walk in the direction of traffic, bicycle traffic that is, whereas a two-way path could be more easily shared. But both of these concepts are contingent on an amount of work in the median that could affect the trees. That is essentially the options that we devised. There are, I'll say, significant trade-offs for each. There wasn't an obvious candidate that really jumped out to us.
Thank you. Let's start commissioner questions. Commissioner Graham.
I have a question. Did you consider a two-way cycle track on the southbound side of the street? Because I feel like if you did a two-way cycle track on the southbound side of the street on the median side, then you actually, when you're going north, there's less conflict points at the intersection than you would with the way you showed the two-way cycle track on the residential side. You know what I'm saying? Because when you're going north when you're going opposite direction, at least at all those intersections, you're then making a right-hand turn onto a two-way street. So I guess it seems like we made the choice to have a two-way, to get rid of parking on one side in order to have, because we can also still have, the dedicated bike lane on the other. But I guess, did you consider at all just doing it on the other side of this street? And then if you're taking away parking, I mean, it seems like it's probably actually you'd be taking away more parking spaces, right? Because you have less curb cuts, but you'd still end up getting 2 lanes, I think, with 2 safer lanes for bicyclists. I don't know. I'm not articulating this very well, but did you consider it?
I understand the point that you're making about the conflicts, and I have to say that I did not explicitly consider a two-way bikeway on the southbound side, but I think it's an idea worth considering. I see certain advantages that you enumerated.
Managed to get across. I know it wasn't articulate, but I'm totally just kidding. I'm glad that you could pull the gems out of there because it's late in the day, but thank you. Okay. That's my major comment, is it seems like that's something that maybe is another option that wasn't explored, which then, at least if you're going to compare the two-way cycle track, then you can start to do it. And you could also understand the number of parking spaces you'd be taking away, which would be another way to compare the trade-offs. I'm done. Sorry.
Great. Who's next? Commissioner Del Rosario.
Do we have an understanding of the peak parking occupancy during school time? I assume that it's the block directly in front of the school, but I'm not sure how many other blocks are completely occupied during school time to the north and south of the school block.
We may have done surveys in the past that I could pull up, but going by more recently, I didn't do a formal count, but as you mentioned, the block adjacent to the school is generally mostly full, but it does drop a fair bit by the next block. By halfway down the next block, there's usually a fair bit of vacancy.
Okay.
I'd say both sides are parked up as well, both northbound and southbound, median and curbside adjacent to the high school.
And is there a parking restriction anywhere along Key Route? Say those 3 blocks around by the high school?
Well, there are parking restrictions in front of the school.
Okay.
And they vary along the block, but some of the block is available for general parking and some is only available during certain times.
Got it. Okay. So in my observation of the median, and not that bike paths on the median, I agree with bike paths on the median, but my observation of the median is that it gets used by people I see mainly walking their dogs. It seems in the off-peak, but I don't know do we know if there's use during school time? Like, is it a popular place for kids to sit and eat lunch? I guess I haven't been that way for a long time, but I assume it has some kind of use like that.
I've seen it used for lunch.
Yeah. Okay. And then my last question is cost. So this sounds like it's a repaving project that we're taking advantage of and doing some striping change. Would there be dollars available to also incorporate bike paths in the median, or would that be a separate planning and design process and project altogether?
That would be a separate project.
Okay. All right, those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Javendal.
Well, risks going into comment, but was there consideration of a parking buffered bike lane for the northbound direction? I mean, the reason I ask that is it seems like it would avoid the conflict with loading and unloading at the high school, that you would still have sort of the closer to the school side available for that parking. The pedestrians have to cross the bike lane, but at least you wouldn't get cars as likely to park in the bike lane.
If I could pull up the screen, maybe I could use that to respond to that question. If we, to respond to Commissioner Javendal's inquiry, just want to clarify, then this bikeway width could be a little bit different, but resemble what's shown here. There would be a buffer for passenger loading and unloading. The parking would be adjacent to that loading zone, and then moving traffic would be on the median side.
Yes.
Did I interpret that correctly?
Correct. That's it.
Okay. I did not consider that option, but as with the other recommendation or suggestion, there are some merits worth considering.
I mean, I feel like that might be more attractive next to the high school where there's no driveways. Where there are driveways, it means we would be keeping the parking on the side with less capacity because of the driveway interruptions. But it is a trade-off.
Seeing you've muted yourself, I'll move along. I'm curious about the northbound and southbound connections, and also the navigation in intersections along this route. Especially problematic seems to be getting across the intersections within the route for an on median or on median paths. And then, what's the transition at the north and south of the area involved? I assume when we're talking about Brighton and Solano, but I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are.
Starting with the transition at intersections. Yeah, that would be, that was a consideration of ours as well. And just in that there were so many permutations that we did not draft up those intersection designs. If there was a two-way bikeway, there are some advantages in that it's an all-way stop controlled intersection, and so everybody has to stop, and so striping diagonal movements isn't going to result in contradictory or non-intuitive type movements. Just if everybody has to stop, then moving diagonally through the intersection is possible. Something that I picked up from Justin is that the bicycle access into the high school is actually off of Portland and not so much along Key Route. And so the amount of bicycle traffic accessing the high school could be diverted to an intersection where somebody turns onto Portland instead, where that would be a shared vehicle and bicycle facility. And so having a median side or southbound side bikeway may still afford a good amount of utility for somebody biking to Albany High School, even if it's not directly curbside. And then to the north, your neighbors in El Cerrito have on-street bike lanes, but they don't have parking on the left side of the street. And so those are those are one-way bike lanes at the intersection of Brighton would be the transition point, and it would require somebody to cross over in the median to align to a two-way bikeway does result in some diagonal movements if such an option was pursued. But again, there are some advantages with always stop controlled intersections where everybody has to stop and it's not a two-way stop intersection where there's yielding involved. So Solano, sorry, what was that?
Like at Solano, for example.
Yes, exactly. Did I answer your question?
Well, I understand you haven't planned out how crossings or how connections might happen to any of the scenarios, both proposed and suggested. But what would the most logical, which options would provide the most logical connections at Solano?
In terms of logical, I'd say the on-street bike lanes, one in each direction, because that people would be moving in the direction of traffic. And depending on which way they choose to turn, they could merge into the vehicle lane. And also it's largely a residential neighborhood on that section of Key Route. And so there's going to be less cross traffic compared to the loading times at the high school. For a two-way bikeway, at Solano, depending on which side it is, it's going to be challenging. I think the transition would largely occur within the median, so the bikeway would need to terminate, and the movements to align people in the proper direction really shouldn't occur within the intersection, because you can imagine if we had a two-way southbound, or if we had a two-way bikeway in the southbound direction and somebody heading westbound wanted to turn, it would look like a wrong way movement, for instance, in the west, if they were going westbound to northbound. I would prefer, my design preference would be that people entering and exiting the bikeway are aligned with traffic on Key Route, and then somewhere along the way that crossover occurs either at an adjacent intersection or within a break in the median somewhere, so that the transition points aren't within the intersection itself.
Thank you. I would be remiss, and I can feel Peggy McQuaid, former commissioner and current city council member, wanting to break in here and point out that not only is there a veterans memorial at the southern tip of the Greenway at Key Route, but the trees planted above it to the north in that median are for individual veterans who died in foreign wars and were from Albany. So we run into some other logistical challenges. Just thought I'd point that out. Great. Any other commissioner questions?
I have one quick question. Andrew, what is the typical dimensions when you have if you had a two-way cycle track that was buffered by cars, what would it be? You're on.
For the bikeway lanes itself,
and the car.
Minimum is 8. Minimum is 8, preferred is 10, or wider. For the buffer between the bikeway and the loading zone or parking zone, minimum is 3, preferred is 5 or wider. If there's bus loading, 8, even 9 feet. So let me just recap. Preferred 10, and I would say either 3 or 5, depending on whether there's accessible loading involved.
Sorry, my question is, if you had, as Commissioner Javandal was saying, like the bike lane and then the car, which acts as the buffer, what's the dimension of the car? Does it have to be more than, what's the minimum dimension of the car?
Of the parking space.
Yes, which would be the buffer. And then do you need an additional buffer?
Yes. If we were to start curbside, again, bikeway, let's call it 10 feet. Loading from the car into a horizontal buffer 3 to 5 feet. Car space itself, typically 7.5 to 8.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner questions? Seeing none, I'm going to open it up for public comment. And we have at least 2 hands raised.
Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, so Key Route is a very wonderful area of Albany for sure. You know, I was wondering if we could put a bike trail in the median, in the middle of the median, and start it at the next block down. I don't know, just around the school and maybe continue toward El Cerrito. I really think that it'd be a good idea to branch out and talk to El Cerrito, talk to Berkeley, and coordinate, because on Key Route, it goes into El Cerrito. And it would be nice if there was a bike lane that just went all the way to Fairmont or Central, and just, if Key Route went all the way, a bike lane all the way, Key Route all the way to, you know, Berkeley to Gilman. And that could be like one big bike lane. I know Masonic's a good bike lane. I mean, that's what I took when I rode my bike from North Berkeley BART Station down to Albany. I ended up coming down Masonic. But I think Key Route would be a good idea also, because that connects all the way. Berkeley, Albany, El Cerrito. So it'd be nice to have a bike lane thoroughfare through a neighborhood that's safe, of course. We keep talking about around these schools. So what are the speed limits for cars around these schools? You know, drop off and loading times. Around Cornell and Talbot, it's really dangerous. There's no speed bumps on Cornell or Talbot yet. I'm just saying, maybe we can put more speed bumps on Key Route. I know they're just around the high school, but maybe we can extend the speed bumps down Key Route as well, just to keep traffic at a minimum. So keep up the good work, and Key Route is a good spot to highlight to be safe. So I really like the idea of a bike trail in the middle of the median, maybe kind of a S-turn trail, something fun. And then that can incorporate with the Parks Commission and community gardens on Key Route, and a walking trail and a bike trail, all on Key Route. Thanks. Keep up the good work, everybody.
Go ahead, Steve.
All right, good evening, commissioners. First off, thanks everybody for all your work on this. And second, thank you for this separate work on the planned mid-intersection stops on Thousand Oaks and Portland. I think that'll probably be the most significant safety improvement aside from what you're talking about here. And just for context, I live on the 600 block of Key Route across the street from the high school. So that's between Portland and Thousand Oaks, and for about 15 years, and I ride my bike most every day. So first, I'd like to say that the order of the design options presented, A, B, C, and D, I'm calling them, are sort of our preference in the scientific study of the 4 people in my household. And so although the first option is probably the most conventional, you know, just basically adding a bike lane on the, you know, to between the traffic and the parked cars, it is consistent with the new nice striping and on the chip seal that El Cerrito just did. And kind of echoing what Mr. Lee said, you know, let's say this is only 4 blocks. So, I mean, they're long blocks, but they do tie into the rest of the city. So, you know, sort of more, we call it radical, but unconventional things of like having a 2-way cycle track adjacent to the median on either side is going to require diagonal funky movements. So in my mind, the unconventional equals unexpected equals unsafe. So some of those are really just almost non-starters in my mind that, you know, the reality is they got to tie into the other stuff. And if that's just not realistic, then I wouldn't waste your time with it. Not to be rude, but just, it's not realistic. And let's see, I also echo the point about Portland and Brighton and Thousand Oaks, that those east-west roads really are what's essential to Albany High School bicycle safety and the park usage safety, because what people really do around here is they ride on the Ohlone, or they ride on those less busy, safer streets, as opposed to Key Route. The folks that I see riding on Key Route are really more like the bike club folks, and they probably have more confidence on riding in more conventional lanes. And with my short amount of time, I'll just a few other quick rants. I'm bugging Public Works to move commercial street sweeping, or Key Route to commercial street sweeping, because there's always cars, because there's no the no parking signs. And repaving this street was attempted about 10 years ago, but got held up because there's I guess a not conventional gas line, at least on the south side, or my side, the west side of Key Route. That's a Public Works issue, but just kind of want to put that out there because I think all those people are gone. And then stop, please, painting the individual parking spaces. I don't know what you call those, but like the parking adjacent to the median is compartmentalized versus just being opened to a more efficient parallel parking. Thank you.
Steve, before you go, can I ask you to repeat what you said about street sweeping?
Yeah, so around here, there's not the community, whatever, just didn't want the signage for the street sweeping. So I think on my side of the block, it's like the last or fourth Wednesday of the month. So the sweeper drives by, and now with COVID being home more often, and of course I can see it anyway, they're just driving down the middle of the street. So back 7 or 8 years ago, the commercial street sweeping route that does Solano and Cleveland and a few other spots would basically make a loop around the high school and Memorial Park, which, if you've been in Albany long enough, you'll know about all the trash in front of the high school, which I have kids too, and I get that happens, and I pick it up. I can show you fun pictures. But for effective sweeping, I think it would be great to have that route do that again. And even if in lieu of doing Cleveland or someplace that probably doesn't have so much litter, because realistically, there's never going to be, like the Public Works mentioned, getting a petition for the signage, and that just would be a real pain for the teachers. So sweeping in the middle of the night when there's not that many cars would be great.
Okay. It sounded like you might be asking for a designated area that had signed and enforced.
No.
Okay.
So no,
Thank
it's
you.
not signage. It's just that when they sweep, I don't know what the new contractor does, the new street sweeping vendor, but I think they're sweeping in the evenings. No,
I don't believe so, but that is outside of what we're dealing with today. I
Sure,
just
sure.
wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. We've had public comment. I'm seeing no other public comment. So let's bring it back to commissioners for comments and discussion. And I'm going to jump in here and say that while Portland and traditionally Thousand Oaks have been the main egress points for cyclists coming to and from the high school, bike racks are located now all in front of the Little Theater, all the way down to Key Route. That area does end up having a lot of mixing of all types. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I wouldn't say that a bike lane in front of the school would be unused by students. Other commissioner comments, and Commissioner Javendel.
So I agree that the bike lane in front of the school would be used, and my son and I would use it every day because we do. That said, I think that I appreciate the comment about the memorial trees on the median and would prefer to not impact those. So if we were to touch the median, I'd say 2 one-way paths would be best for that, but better yet would be just keeping the bike lanes off the median entirely. As far as the on-street options go, I like the one-way bike lane on each side as the most straightforward when you get to the intersections. So for me, what I see as the preferred option would be the buffered bike lanes as shown in the first option, with the exception that on the northbound block by the high school, I'd like to explore making that a parking buffered bike lane so the bike lane doesn't get blocked by drop-off activities. That's it for me.
Thank you. Other comments? Commissioner Graham?
I agree. I mean, I think this is the context of this discussion is a paving, is paving, repaving. And so, I mean, I think we should figure out a way to get bike infrastructure done as a part of this. Now, if there's a long-term plan to have bike lanes in the median, so be it. But I think that's a pie in the sky. And now we're talking about paint, and paint is like, we should get it in there. So I guess I think it's gonna be a hard sell to get people to, I mean, I think once you talk about removing parking here, you're going to, have a whole nother discussion. So I do think you should think about an option that has a sharrow on the northbound, just frankly for discussion's sake with the neighborhood. So a sharrow on the northbound, and then just a class 1 on the, or 2 on the southbound. Do I have my directions right? Yeah. I mean, I actually think that if we were to take away parking, I do think I would like to see investigated what I suggested on that. I think you know what I'm talking about, Andrew. And I think, I actually think it doesn't cause as many unsafe interactions with cars as perhaps the other version, if we were to put a 2-way on the other side. So those are my only comments, really.
Thank you. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Sure. I think I agree with most everything that was said. One way each direction makes, one way bike lane in each direction, buffered makes sense. I think the transitions are a little awkward when you get to the El Cerrito border with a 2-way cycle track. Though those do feel, I think, better to ride in. But you also have that challenge in front of the school, which would be tough. So I like Fareed's suggestion of the transition to a parking buffer in front of the school to maintain the loading zones. Yeah, I don't. It sounds like that's a separate project to look at. Anything done to the median, so we shouldn't look at that at that time. I think that might be it for. I'm not so concerned about the parking. I know it's going to be an issue. I understand that, and going there in off-peak hours or outside of school hours, I'd say parking is maybe 50% occupied. So there's plenty of capacity there. If you end up removing what would be about 25% of the parking for this project. But I think the capacity is still the capacity is still there to accommodate all the cars. And the challenge would be during school time, but it seems like there are the blocks further away from the school could get filled up and probably still meet that capacity, and people have to walk to school 2 blocks, which I think is an okay sacrifice to make given the benefit that we would get with the for the bike lane. That's all.
Yeah, I guess I think the parking gets pretty full close to Solano. The median is one of the only places close to Solano that's not flanked by houses or other uses. You know, certainly the Greenway has a similar effect on Masonic, but I know that north of Solano it gets pretty parked up for the senior center and for other uses. Just throwing that out there. I'm definitely interested in cycle track on the northbound side in front of the high school block, or on the high school block in front of the high school. I think it's reasonable to push parking out from that area, even though it will be a debate. And I'm given the nearby slow streets and the Greenway with a somewhat similar alignment. I think that for the rest of Key Route, both northbound and southbound, that an on-street bike lane is probably sufficient. And maybe that doesn't pencil out northbound. I'm sorry, I've forgotten. There's so many things we've talked about, but that certainly matches what's happening to the north of us. So that's kind of the balance that I would think about initially. Any other discussion or comments? I don't believe we need a resolution on this one. No, we're just making comments. Great. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for bringing those to us. Pardon me as I'm switching windows. With that, seeing no further comments, I'm going to move on to item number 5.3, the review of 2020 vehicle injury collision data.
And that one is me. Can you guys all see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So today I'll be talking about our 2020 vehicle collision data, as the title would suggest. And the data source here, this is all coming from the TIMS system from UC Berkeley, Transportation Injury Mapping. And specifically this statewide integrated traffic record system from the California Highway Patrol. It includes data from the Highway Patrol as well as the Albany Police Department that are all integrated into one, although today we won't be talking about the Highway Patrol data, just the within the city collisions. And I'll just note that the 2019 and 2020 data is still provisional, so it might change. There may be sorry about that. There may be collisions added at a later point or things edited. And these are specifically injury collisions, so anything from complaint of pain to fatal. The last time this commission received a review of this data was in July of 2020. And this report covers collisions throughout the year of 2020, so from January through December of last year. As I said, it excludes the freeway, and specifically it's focusing on pedestrian, bicycle, and severe or fatal vehicle collisions. So those are the categories we're looking at here. So the first thing I'll note is that with all those categories combined, the total number of collisions is at a new low for the period we're studying between 2013 and 2020, at a total of 10 here, and part of an overall drop in the last 2 years, as you can see this. And then breaking that down by the type of collision to severe, fatal, pedestrian, and bicycle, you can see for each one of those categories, it's also at an all-time low compared to previous years, either tying or in the case of bicycle injuries, I think actually reaching the lowest point, or maybe that's a tie as well. And you can see in particular, pedestrian collisions took a huge dive from 10 in 2019 to just 4 in 2020. So of course, this is all excellent news. We love seeing a smaller number of collisions. However, I will note that the pandemic was definitely a significant part of that effect. As we know, there were a lot of things related to data that are a little bit weird last year. And one of the easiest ways to see that impact in this vehicle collision data is by looking at it on a month-by-month basis. So on this first chart on the left here, the red line shows the average collisions in each month on the previous years, 2013 through 2019. And you can see for most months, it's 1 or 2 collisions per month. It's relatively stable. In 2020, there's 0 collisions through the entirety of spring. You can all probably remember, you know, in the very beginning of the lockdowns last year, when there were basically empty streets everywhere. No one was commuting, no one was really out much. And so I think that's probably a really major reason why we see so few collisions across the year, and especially no collisions throughout those several months. And then as the lockdowns started to kind of become less intense and people started getting out more, we start to see the numbers going back up a little bit. If we take a look over here on the right chart, this is Alameda County. So it gives us a kind of larger sample size to look at, and we see a very similar effect. There's a pretty sharp drop off in the spring of last year, and then it rises as those lockdowns kind of eased. Now, of course, none of this is to say that, you know, the pandemic is the only reason we're seeing low collision numbers. There is a larger trend in that direction, but it's definitely a piece of the puzzle. As usual, most of these collisions take place in our major corridors throughout the city, and in particular, San Pablo and Solano Avenues. This is the same as it has been in previous years, nothing unusual in that respect. And then I'll just give a quick overview of the collisions. As I said, there were 10 of them. There were no fatal collisions, which I'm happy to report. There was only 1 severe vehicle collision, which was at Washington and Adams. It was an improper turning violation where an eastbound vehicle struck a parked truck and then overturned, which led to a severe injury for the driver. We have 4 pedestrian collisions. All of these were pedestrian right-of-way violations where a vehicle struck a pedestrian in the crosswalk. The first at San Pablo and Brighton, with a vehicle making a left turn onto Brighton eastbound. Also San Pablo and Portland, with a vehicle striking a pedestrian going westbound on Portland. And then we have Key Route in Washington, where a southbound vehicle on Key Route struck 2 pedestrians, and there was alcohol involved in this one. And also Solano and Keynes. We don't have much direction information as to what happened here, but it was a suspected minor injury. None of these led to severe injuries, just minor or other visible, as it's keyed in the data. For bicycle collisions, there were 2 at Marin. The Marin and Keynes was a wrong side of the road violation. And this was the bicyclist at fault, striking a northbound vehicle. And then at Masonic as well, also the bicyclist at fault. It was the automobile's right of way, and the bicyclist was attempting to enter the Greenway and ran into that westbound vehicle. At Solano and Masonic, we have a westbound vehicle that's turning right and struck a southbound cyclist, probably not looking into the Greenway to see an oncoming cyclist. Jackson and Washington. This is another one with the cyclist at fault going south going eastbound downhill and not stopping, and then running into a vehicle that was going straight southbound. And then finally at San Pablo and Castro Street, it's unknown exactly what happened here. We just know that both the vehicle and the bicycle were going southbound and the vehicle was at fault. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any commissioner questions? Not seeing any. Are there any public questions? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Let's bring it back to the commission. And we'll take commissioner comments. Commissioner Javinel.
I just want to say it's a really good presentation, a lot of good information. I appreciate the detailed breakdown and analysis of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
I concur, and especially the you know, sniffing out the details of the timing and the comparisons were very helpful. I'm not sure we have a lot to add or to do, but take away that you know, there was less, but it's coming back. So thank you for helping us keep an eye on that. Are there any further commissioner comments or questions?
Just want to echo the other comments, and thanks for the information. Very detailed. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. And with that, I'm going to close this item and move along to item number 5.4. This is an update on the San Pablo Avenue specific planning process.
Good evening, excuse me. Good evening, Commissioners. Jeff Bond, the Community Development Director. I'll present this agenda item to you. And I'll try to keep this brief given the time and that you have an additional agenda item beyond this. I do have a brief staff report I'd like to, or a presentation I'd like to show you, and I'll just dive into that. We hear a lot in news and in the public policy world about housing issues in California, and what we're seeing is a lot of pressure through different legislative changes and economic pressure on families and households in California to have more housing. And the kind of housing that we're seeing, particularly along San Pablo Avenue in other cities, is like the image that's shown here, which is a project in Berkeley at San Pablo and Ashby. With generally 4 to 6 stories in height, ground floor retail to some degree or another, and trying to integrate both some sort of pedestrian activities and ground floor activation of the ground floor, as well as some parking for residents and commercial uses. Bear with me a second. As you can see from this graphic, we're not getting a lot of development in Albany. And historically, our zoning standards have been somewhat more restrictive than in neighboring cities. You can see both in El Cerrito and Berkeley, although they do have longer stretches of San Pablo Avenue than we do. There's no question that they get per mile, say, that they're seeing more residential development than we are here in Albany. So we applied for a grant and received actually 2 different grants from the State Housing Community Development Department for totaling $225,000 to look into updating our zoning standards for San Pablo Avenue. It's called the San Pablo Avenue Specific Plan, which is a particular planning process that's specified in the California Government Code. And it's basically a combination of amendments to the city's zoning ordinance and, if necessary, amendments to the general plan, and then with corresponding environmental review as appropriate. The Planning and Zoning Commission is the lead advisory body for the city working on this. They've been working on it now for more than a year. They've had about 7 study sessions so far and have gotten a lot of feedback from the commission, and our consultants now are in the stage of actually writing a draft specific plan for review in coming months. Most of it is going to be focusing in on the standard zoning things such as heights and densities and setbacks and what's allowed on the ground floor and so forth. There hasn't been a lot of discussion about transportation aspects of the project, and that frankly has been intentional. We're not looking to, in this specific plan, not looking to break new ground on transportation policy. There's a lot going on, as you've heard from the Alameda County Transportation Commission about the work they're doing for the San Pablo corridor. We also have our existing active transportation plan, and we would hope to be working on a new active transportation plan soon. And then last but not least, it's a Caltrans state highway, as you know, so they control much of the approval process, if you will, for any roadway changes. To the degree that there has been discussion at the Planning and Zoning Commission about things in the transportation realm, it's mostly been parking and to some degree modernizing our transportation demand management programs for future projects. What I did want to include in, and as part of the staff report and as attachment, we did do a very focused, modest transportation analysis for purposes of the California Environmental Quality Act. And I'll try to keep this really quick, and if you have more questions, we can go into it in detail. But basically, CEQA, as the law is known, the acronym, allows us to use older environmental impact reports if we can demonstrate that the new policy or program that we're looking at is within the range of what was studied originally. So in this case, we're using the environmental impact report that was prepared for the general plan that was approved in 2016. And basically what we had our consultant team do, and they subcontracted with W-Trans, which is a transportation consulting firm that does a lot of this kind of work. And they basically compared what the original projections for the future were in the general plan, which called for relatively more commercial development and relatively less residential development, to what's emerging out of the specific plan, which is to swap out the commercial for more housing. And basically what they have found is, they did the analysis in 2 different ways intentionally. There's a level of service analysis, which looks at segments of roadway and see whether the function of those segments is acceptable or not. And with either the existing general plan or the changes, there will be some degrading of the certain level of service over time into the future. That's expected. And actually, it's anticipated that the proposals in the specific plan with more residential will be a little bit better. There will still be some issues with the level of service on some of the roadway segments, and those tables were in your staff report. But it's better than keeping the general plan as it is today. And that's basically because in some cases, commercial uses can have a much more intense impact on roadways, particularly, if you had something like a hardware store, that can get a lot more vehicle activity in particular. The consultant also just briefly looked at vehicle miles traveled, which is a newer metric and really the more contemporary metric for looking at potential development projects. And because the specific plan is within a high quality transit corridor, it's expected that the projects that will emerge out of this plan will improve vehicle miles traveled in the area compared to having the same amount of housing pushed further out into suburban areas where people are traveling further and have fewer options there. They have no choice but to drive their own personal vehicle. This was brought to your attention, I think, a request of the commission at a previous meeting. We wanted to give you a quick briefing on it. If there are any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and encourage you, if you're interested in the housing side of this, to participate in planning commission meetings. I don't have a specific date for the next. We're going to do a brief check-in, I think, on November 10th. But the next real big milestone in this process will be the presentation of the draft specific plan report itself to the commission, and I expect that will be a major milestone for people to really sink their teeth into what we've prepared so far, and that would lead to recommendation that goes to the city council probably sometime in relatively early to mid 2022. And so with that, I will stop my screen share and be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner questions?
I just have one question, is what they've done, what they're proposing for parking standards, or have they gotten there yet?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about that. I don't have it would take me a second to pull up the document. That one of the interesting things that's happening is different commissioners have different opinions about what parking standards should be. So if you'll bear with me just a second.
So that's okay. I can participate in the right realm. That's all right.
Okay.
Or you can just let us know next time we come.
Okay. Okay.
Del Rosario.
There was a mention in the staff report about TDM measures. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how the city would try to include those into the developments or this plan?
Yeah, so we haven't really fleshed them out in detail. To be honest, our TDM program is not very well developed. It's not something that we've really used much, in part because we haven't had these kinds of projects come forward. But I would anticipate that we would be doing, and the commission has talked about basically trading off. If we want less vehicle travel in general, and one way to do that is reduce parking, and as a substitute for that, increase bicycle parking and improve, if it's relevant, to improve access to transit stops, and then provide, for residents and employees, to the degree that there are remaining commercial uses in some of these buildings, the standard resources to, whether it's a Clipper card or other mechanisms and incentives to use transit. But we haven't fleshed it out in any detail. That will be part of the draft plan that comes out in the coming months.
Thanks.
Other commissioner questions? Let's see if we have any public comment. I'm not currently seeing any raised hands. No, so bring it back for commission comment. Del Rosario.
Thanks for the information. It's definitely good that the Transportation Commission is taking a look at this. I know there's a more updated movement to measure impacts through VMT, but I know also that transit operators across the state have relied on LOS as a way to measure transit delay. And I think the way that this is playing itself out is that the cities may do their own or have their own requirements for LOS evaluation for whatever purposes, in addition to the VMT. And I hope that we can do that in this city, especially on San Pablo Avenue, where there's a potential transit project that we're looking at, and we should see what the impacts are. And LOS is one of the clearer way to see what the specific delays are at intersections or segments of the streets, and then understand what mitigations for transit could be implemented to address those impacts. And you just don't really capture that well with VMT measurement. It's the right measurement, but it just doesn't get that nuance for understanding transit delay. So I hope that we can look at that still and put that requirement on projects through a specific plan to understand what the clear impacts are to transit performance would be.
Thank you. I think that's a really good comment, and it's not something that we've delved into, but I understand what you're suggesting, and particularly with respect to transit, which is making transit work as well as we possibly can is key to making this work for the corridor. So, if we could, my reaction to that is great for transit. We worry about that when we look at using LOS for vehicle movements, because it always ends up leading to bigger intersections and wider roadways or restrictions on development, which for other reasons is problematic. We have housing mandates that we have to meet, and some of it needs to go on San Pablo Avenue. So, but I think for transit in particular, that's something you're right. We should be paying more attention to.
Yeah, and the just to follow up on that, I think that is fair concern, and the mitigations that could be done could be transit specific mitigations so that they're not increasing vehicle capacity or anything like that.
Commissioner Jamigal.
I just wanted to kind of follow up on Commissioner Del Rosario's comment about LOS as a measure for protecting transit. In many cases, CEQA historically looked at intersection level of service, but it can be broken down by movement. So the movements that are being used by transit can be the ones where the level of service is maintained. And we could maybe say, hey, well, we're willing to accept a degradation of the cross street level of service as long as the level of service along the transit corridor movements are maintained. So that might be something we could look at that sort of addresses both of those concerns, because I understand, as Jeff has said, that historically you kind of looked at, oh, the intersection level of service went down, let's add some lanes. And that's not what we want to do here. We just want to maintain the signal timing in a manner that will protect the transit operations and reliability.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that nuance. No reason to throw out the bathwater when we're switching measurements. It's, yeah, I've been following the San Pablo Avenue plan process, and also the recent Albany Bowl property development process, and it's clear to me that the transportation management program, I'm using the wrong acronym, that needs to be updated and probably potentially reinforced in our statutes. That goes sort of beyond the San Pablo Avenue plan. It wasn't that long ago that we did bike parking requirements, and it seems like things have changed since then. For example, long tail and cargo bikes were not included in that standard, and I think for myself anyway, my understanding of kind of the difference in bike parking, there's sort of street side, employee, and resident bike parking, and they're all kind of different animals. And I'm not sure that in fact, I'm pretty sure that our biking laws in Albany don't cover those as well as they could. So I think that's something for us to keep in mind for the future.
Certainly happy to look at those. I think it's a citywide planning effort, not just for San Pablo Avenue. You're correct that we don't have a standard for cargo or long tail, but we do have. It does need to be secure parking, and so it's pretty good. It's not perfect. We can go back and visit that, and that has been a subject of discussion with the commission. I would expect that out of this specific plan for projects on Solano Avenue, or St. Pablo Avenue, excuse me, that there will be a specific standard set up for long-tail, secure long-tail bike parking.
Great. So I guess this raises, I should also mention, I don't think we have a standard for electrical outlets around a long-term bike parking, which is another thing with e-bikes coming along. But this sets up a situation where you've encouraged the commissioners and the public to go and be a part of this process. But if it's a transportation issue, you know, can this commission expect that they shouldn't comment on certain things because they will be coming back to this commission? Can you give us some guidance on that?
I don't mind coming back to the commission as frequently as you want, as your agendas accommodate. It's nice to have a lead advisory body so that two commissions don't start working at cross purposes, and that you're looking at it holistically. I would imagine that the Planning and Zoning Commission would welcome a recommendation from you on, hey, don't forget about X, Y, and Z. But I think that would be the way to kind of manage it, is to flow it through from this commission or other commissions for that matter, and have the Planning and Zoning Commission kind of consolidate that into a final recommendation to the City Council. Of course, your recommendation would also be communicated as clearly. It wouldn't be like we're burying it, but I do think it's important that the Planning and Zoning Commission, because they're the ones who are going to be regulating these projects as they come along. In many cases, the Transportation Commission may not have an opportunity to look at individual projects. So I think it's important that the Planning and Zoning Commission continue to take the lead on it, but absolutely happy to have you take a careful look at the parking aspects of it if you're particularly interested in it.
Thank you. I personally, I think that would be great if we had a chance to make recommendations on parking aspects of and other transportation aspects of the San Pablo Avenue plan. And I was really trying to ask something different, so let me try again. As individuals, you've encouraged us to take part in the process, but especially with what you've just said, we may not want to take part in the process and make comments about transportation issues that could in the future come to the Transportation Commission.
I see, I understand. Yeah, you're right. You may want to consolidate the five of you as a group, make one recommendation, or of course you can do both. You could go to a Planning and Zoning Commission, speak to parking issues, come back to this commission and make a recommendation. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I was speaking to, encouraging your participation on the broader issue of providing input to the specific plan as a whole, including what's most important in our primary focus, which is housing policy and zoning standards, which I wouldn't recommend that this commission delve into that, because you don't process those kinds of applications you don't see those.
It's not in our purview. And it's very clear that as individuals, we can go and talk about that. But I guess maybe I'm not thinking about the Brown Act correctly, but I thought that I am not supposed to speak in public on a matter that I can expect would come to this commission that relates to the purview of this commission. Because then I'm broadcasting what my opinion is on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Let me run that one by the city attorney. You're right. There are some nuances to how the communications that go on. My intuition is it would be okay because you're at a public meeting and you're talking about what's on the agenda, and if somebody's interested in that, they could be there. But I will double check that, and if we need to clarify this at your next meeting, we can add that to the announcements part of the agenda as an example.
Great.
But I think it would be all right if you did. From my sense of an experience with the Brown Act is it would be all right if you did both of them, because both of them are at public, properly noticed meetings.
Okay. I look forward to hearing more about that. And maybe we'll have a conversation offline, because it doesn't make sense to me, but I look for more information. And I think this commission welcomes contributing however we can. So please let us know how it's going, and give us a chance to weigh in on transportation.
Okay.
Any other commissioner comments? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Bond, for that presentation.
You're welcome.
Discussion. And we're going to move on to item 5.5, the update on state legislation AB 43 and rules for setting speed limits.
Thank you, Chair McCroskey. Can everyone see my screen again?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So this is an update on AB 43. A little bit of background. This is a law now that makes amendments related to speed limits and traffic safety. And you all may remember that this commission heard a presentation on this bill back in April and recommended that the city council support it. In May, the council adopted a resolution in support, and just a few weeks ago in early October, it was signed into law by the governor. So I'm just going to go over some of the changes that it makes and how those impact Albany. And the biggest one is business activity districts. So it states that a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit can be reduced to 20 miles an hour in a business activity district. And then it goes on to define what exactly that is. So first of all, it's a street that has no more than 4 lanes. And then 3 of the following bullets here. So 50% of the property along the street is retail or dining. It has on-street parking, stop signs and stoplights that are no more than 600 feet apart, and crosswalks with no signal or stop sign. So based on staff's evaluation, Solano qualifies with 3 of those 4 items, and of course, only 2 lanes. And therefore, according to this bill, the speed limit on Solano could be reduced to 20 miles an hour. So that's the major change that AB 43 makes. Another minor one is the ability to maintain current speed limits. If the city were to do a new traffic survey that required a higher speed limit, but no new lanes had been added to that street, the city could instead opt to maintain the current speed limit or restore the immediately prior one. So it prevents us from being forced to raise the speed limit if there haven't been any significant changes to that roadway. And then the other major change has to do with school zones. So current law says that you can create a 15 or 20 mile an hour school zone on streets that are in residential districts with a maximum of 2 traffic lanes and a maximum of 30 miles an hour as a speed limit in areas that are not directly adjacent to the school. And based on those criteria, Buchanan, Solano, and Marin cannot be listed as these 15 or 20 mile an hour school zones. They have to stick with the 25 mile an hour limit. And AB 43 doesn't actually change the rules in regard to school zones, but it creates a new type of criteria that could potentially allow us to lower the limits in those areas. So that's the safety corridor aspect of this. So 20 mile an hour speed limit is now allowed in safety corridors or areas with high concentrations of vulnerable groups. Both those terms still haven't been fully defined. In a few months, the Department of Transportation is going to release more on the definitions of those. We know that safety corridors are limited to only 1/5 of streets. And we expect that, just based on the way they're described, that areas around the schools would probably fall into those categories, and maybe some other areas around the city as well. However, the big caveat with this is that it doesn't actually go into effect until the middle of 2024. So it's very possible that in a couple of years, we would be able to reduce the speed limits on those areas near the school to 20 miles an hour, maybe additional areas that have a lot of pedestrians or bikers, things like that too. But again, we can't actually do that right now. And that's all I have for AB 43. There are a variety of other changes it makes, but none particularly relevant to Albany. So again, happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thanks for the update. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Del Rosario.
So if I can understand this correctly, we could look into the possibility of reducing speed limit on Solano from 25 to 20 for the entire length of it in the city of Albany. And by when could we start looking at that?
So that section of the law, it goes into effect now. It could be lowered as soon as possible. And yes, it would be possible to lower it on technically the very end of Solano that becomes more residential wouldn't be eligible, but the whole section that makes up the majority of the street where we have all of our retail areas, all of that would be eligible for that 20-mile-an-hour speed limit.
Got it. Okay. And then a second question is, maybe it's under the original guidance, but could or are the speed limits in front of schools on the residential streets, so Talbot and Cornell, for Cornell Elementary, for example, or Brighton, could those go down to 20 miles per hour under current regulation?
I'll refer to Justin on that, but I believe so, unless there's some aspect I don't know about.
Yes, the roadways that are residential, that are 2 lanes of traffic, can be reduced to 15 or 20 miles per hour.
Yeah.
There was a map, I can try to bring it up. I think it was the last attachment from the previous presentation on that identified which of those segments, which roadway segments near the schools look like they qualify.
Good. Thanks.
Any other commissioner questions before public comment? Seeing none, let's go ahead and allow public comment.
I see Jeremiah.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Can I give 4 minutes? I'm just kidding. I'll take the 3. You know what? I am so excited about this topic, and I just want to say thank you so many times. I'm just so happy, to say the least. So I was wondering why we couldn't go 15 on Solano. I mean, there are signs saying 15 currently. I was just wondering if, we could just keep that, due to past practice, if that's a thing. That would be great, because 20 miles an hour is still too fast when someone's trying to cross Solano at Gordo's in the dark, because there's no street light there. And you got 1,000 people using that crosswalk a day. The safety of this with reduced speed is what's going to save people's lives. First of all, Solano's on a down slope. You're going 25, 20, takes longer for a big Safeway truck or an AC Transit bus to slow down and stop for a kid running out in the middle of the street. So I think 15 is a great thing for Solano. You know, you just want to stroll down Solano anyway at a nice cruising speed. And so far as the school zones, wonderful. That's exactly it. School zones, reduce speed around the school for all schools. And I was wondering if eventually it could be, you know, preschools as well, you know, maybe 500 feet or 400 feet around a preschool. You know, because sometimes people have their residence or their house as a preschool on residential streets. I think 15 would be great around the schools. That would help with loading and drop off times just to keep it extra safe. And if 20 is the slowest you can go, then maybe we can, you know, request 15 during loading and drop off times, but then 20 miles an hour for the rest of it. That in turn teaches kids safety, because when they're getting their driver's license and they're starting out driving, and now we have school zones and there's signs everywhere saying to drive slow, these kids are going to grow up learning to drive safe. And I think that's a great start. So keep up the good work, everybody, and thank you so very much.
Thank you for your comments, Jeremiah. Jeremiah had one specific question that I caught on to, which was if we've been reducing or suggesting or advising a 15-mile-per-hour speed on Solano now, will that, couldn't that continue? Do we need to do 20? Could we do 15?
The 15-mile-per-hour signage is advisory. It's warning signs, not what's called regulatory or the speed limit, essentially. So 15-mile-per-hour signs could remain as an advisory signage adjacent to the outdoor activity taking on. They're not affected by the change in law.
Great. Commissioner comments, discussion.
Did you want me to put the image on the screen of?
If you've got it handy, that'd be great.
Okay. At the time of the earlier discussion, the interest was mainly on Marin, Buchanan, Solano in terms of concerns over speed. So we didn't take any further action at that last discussion on the reduced speed limit school zone.
Can you scooch over to the right so we can see the key? I see. Great. I can't actually see the difference between blue and black, or I'm not perceiving the difference.
Blue is just the icon versus the black street segment.
Okay. Right, so we're limited to only reducing the speeds on the black segments. And until sometime in 2024, we don't expect to be able to change that at this time. Okay. Commissioner Javandal.
So I think that unless I'm misunderstanding, what Justin was telling us was that based on the existing state law for school zones, the streets that he's highlighted could be reduced to 15 or 20 miles an hour. That's not something provided by AB 43. So the existing law would allow us to do that on those streets. So we can just have the city council declare a 15 or 20 mile an hour school zone on those residential 2-lane streets.
I believe there was some discussion last time this was involved in other cities in terms of whether there were required engineering and traffic studies be conducted, even though you're allowed to do it. So if you wish to pursue that, I'll have to investigate exactly what steps we would need to take before we were ready to do that. But the law does allow it currently for those segments.
For City of Berkeley, that decision kind of came from our attorneys. So I think we would recommend the same approach for Albany, to consult legal counsel.
Commissioner Graham?
I was just going to suggest maybe we could make a motion for staff to take this all under consideration and come back to us with a proposal of how we could implement either of these two changes.
So both school zones and Solano Avenue?
Yes.
Other comments? I would just like to remind the commission that last time we looked into this, Commissioner Javadel shared with us that Berkeley implemented all of the school's speed zones at the same time and enforced none of them. And that apparently resulted in very little compliance. So we might want to think about rollout and if not a lot of enforcement, which I don't think we can expect, maybe minimal enforcement with a parsed rollout that could allow for that, or at least publicity around each one as they were rolled out. Just bringing that up. Okay, Commissioner Graham, would you like to make that motion or propose that motion?
Yes, I would like to make the motion that staff come back to us with a plan of how we could proceed with implementing the school zones and the reduced speeds on Solano Avenue.
I'll second that.
Javadel seconds. Discussion, Commissioner Del Rosario?
Is it implied that enforcement would be looked at in there too?
I missed that.
Is it implied that enforcement would be looked at in there as well? In the motion?
Why don't we add it just for?
Sure.
Any further discussion? Mr. Freed, would you poll us, please?
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Graham,
Yes.
Commissioner Javadel,
Aye.
Chairman Crosky.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great. With that, we're doing pretty well on time still. I think we'll move on. Thank you for the presentation. Let's move on to announcements.
I have a few announcements for you. The first is that the local road safety plan RFP is out. It is currently open through November 16th. So that is in the works. Also sharing that City of Berkeley recently had their second reading of the shared electric micromobility permit program and possibly would be entering into agreements with electric scooter or bike operators in early 2022. So we may soon see inquiries coming back our way with folks looking to also operate in Albany. couple of details in terms of what we've talked about previously on that. They are requiring lock 2 devices and under 15 mile per hour operating speeds. And it looks like up to 3 operators in the first year. So with one, at least in the initial first few months period, being reserved for devices with a seat. So I'm guessing trying to see if there's a electric bike option in the mix, not just scooters. So we will probably have more discussion soon on that as we start getting inquiries our way. And the last announcement was that council has requested a discussion on the in-street outdoor dining. So that's going on, that's on their agenda for Monday's meeting. Those are my announcements.
Great. Any other commission announcements?
I have an announcement which is related to the BART and Capital Corridor Link 21 Trans-Bay Rail Crossing Program. It's doing a second round of community outreach in November. There will be webinars and live questions and answers online. You can find out more at link21program.org. There will be some online surveys as well.
Great, thank you. Any other announcements? All right then. How about future agenda items? Do we have any commission requests for future agenda items? Looks like we have a public request for future agenda items. Let's give 1 minute.
Hi, thank you. Maybe an odd request. I don't know if it's on the work plan, but I was just going to request a speed survey or a speed study, maybe on Solano or somewhere in these locations to get some data. I mean, I witnessed AC Transit buses flying down Solano. So I just was wondering if we can get some real data, a speed study with the air tubes, I guess. And I don't know if it has a mile per hour sign of, your current mile an hour sign shows what you're traveling at. But I think the air tube speed study, maybe if that's just sitting on a trailer somewhere, not being used right now, maybe we could just always be using it, always be getting some data. If that trailer, doesn't just sit around being unused. Hopefully it's on a queue. Thanks.
Thanks for your comment. That seems more to be a detail about this item, and we're not actually discussing the item, so we can't really respond to that at this time. With that, if there are no commissioner requests for future agenda items, I'm going to say thank you. And our next meeting is Wednesday, December 1st at 7 p.m. instead of our usual time. And obviously we can't really do our semi-traditional holiday gathering, but I would encourage everyone to wear or at least have holiday flair in their background. How about that? Not a requirement, just an encouragement. Keep it a little festive. If you'd rather have, be wearing a Hawaiian shirt and have a beach background, that's up to you. It's all in how you want to celebrate this last meeting of the year. And with that, thank you all. Thank you, staff. And look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everyone.